It often happens when we are rushing through our day, opening a door, sitting quietly in a room, or walking outside without paying attention, that something small passes by our sight. A bird on a wire, an insect moving with purpose, a cat resting calmly in the shade. We notice them for a moment. Then our minds return to worries, deadlines, and noise. Yet Allah reminds us again and again that nothing around us exists without meaning. Every creature we casually overlook was created with wisdom, balance, and a role written by Allah long before we were aware of it. When the heart slows down, even briefly, these ordinary moments can become gentle reminders rather than distractions. The Quran often draws our attention back to creation, not to overwhelm us, but to soften our hearts. Allah invites us to look, to reflect, and to recognize that just as these creatures are sustained without panic or despair, our lives too are under His care. They do not rush their provision, nor do they question their worth. They move forward in quiet obedience, fulfilling their purpose in ways we may never fully understand. In that reflection, the heart learns Tawakkul, not as a slogan, but as a lived reality. When we observe creation with sincerity, gratitude begins to grow naturally. We realize how much we are given without asking and how often mercy surrounds us unnoticed. These moments do not call us to fear or superstition, but to awareness and balance. They remind us that Barakah is found in remembrance, that halal effort carries dignity, and that repentance is always open without shame. In watching the world Allah has made, the heart learns to settle, the mind learns to trust, and the soul remembers that both dunya and akhirah were designed to work together under the wisdom of the one who created them all. When we look around us, it is easy to assume that only the big moments in life carry meaning, while the small and ordinary things simply exist in the background. Yet Islam consistently redirects the human heart to notice what it often ignores. Every living creature around us, no matter how small or common, is described in the Quran as an ayah, a sign pointing beyond itself. This means that creation is not random scenery, but a deliberate reminder placed in our daily lives. When Allah invites people to reflect on the birds in the sky, the animals on land, and the creatures that move unseen, He is not asking for scientific analysis alone, but for spiritual awareness that reconnects the heart to its creator. The Quran repeatedly emphasizes that all creatures glorify Allah in their own way, even if human beings do not understand how. This truth reshapes how a believer views the world. A small insect moving with purpose, a bird returning to its nest, or an animal seeking food are not meaningless events. They demonstrate obedience without complaint, reliance without anxiety, and balance without excess. These creatures do not rebel against their nature, nor do they question the provision assigned to them. Their existence becomes a silent lesson that Allah's wisdom operates continuously, even when human beings are distracted or doubtful. Ignoring these signs is not merely about missing beauty. It reflects a deeper condition of the heart. When life becomes rushed, noisy, and goal-driven, reflection is often replaced by impatience. Islam addresses this by encouraging moments of pause. Reflection is an act of worship when it leads the heart back to humility. Recognizing that Allah sustains countless creatures every moment reminds the believer that their own struggles are not overlooked. The same Lord who provides for what we barely notice is fully aware of what weighs heavily on our hearts. This awareness also protects the believer from arrogance. Human beings often measure value through size, strength, or control, yet Allah shows that even the smallest creatures fulfill roles essential to balance in creation. This humbles the heart, reminding it that importance is not defined by visibility or power, but by obedience to Allah's design. In this way, everyday creatures quietly teach sincerity. They do not perform for recognition, nor do they seek validation. They exist as they were created to exist, fulfilling their purpose without distraction. Reflection on creation also nurtures patience. When observing how creatures move through life without rushing their outcomes, the believer learns that divine timing governs everything. Provision arrives when Allah wills, not when anxiety demands it. This lesson directly strengthens Tawakkul. Trust in Allah, not as passive waiting, but as calm confidence that effort and reliance work together. Just as creatures move, search, and strive within their limits, humans are encouraged to make halal effort while leaving results to Allah. Importantly, Islam does not turn reflection into superstition. The presence of creatures around us is not a sign of doom or hidden messages predicting harm. Rather, their existence is a reminder of Allah's mercy, order, and wisdom. This distinction is crucial. True reflection brings peace, not fear. It invites gratitude, not panic. When the heart understands this, It becomes protected from cultural myths and unfounded beliefs that Islam clearly rejects. Gratitude grows naturally through this lens. When a person realizes how much sustenance, protection, and balance Allah provides to all living beings, complaining becomes harder and thankfulness becomes easier. The believer begins to see blessings in what was once ignored. This gratitude is not limited to words but shapes attitude, making the heart softer and more receptive to guidance. Finally, reflecting on everyday creatures brings balance between dunya and akhirah. Islam does not ask believers to withdraw from the world, but to move through it with awareness. Creation continues its role without neglecting purpose, reminding humans that worldly responsibilities and spiritual growth are not opposites. When the heart learns to reflect instead of overlook, daily life itself becomes a classroom of faith, quietly teaching reliance, humility, gratitude, and awareness of Allah's presence in every moment. Human beings are often drawn to what appears large, powerful, or impressive, and in doing so they can overlook the quiet lessons carried by small and ordinary creatures. Islam gently redirects attention away from pride and toward humility by reminding the heart that greatness in the sight of Allah is not measured by size, strength, or visibility. When a believer reflects on the smallest forms of life around them, they are reminded that Allah's wisdom operates at every level of creation, not only in what draws admiration. A tiny creature moving with precision, survival, and balance becomes a mirror for the human heart, showing how limited human control truly is. Humility in Islam begins with recognizing one's true position before Allah. Small creatures exist without arrogance, entitlement, or complaint. They do not demand more than what they are given, nor do they resist the role assigned to them. This is not because they lack awareness, but because Allah has designed them to live in harmony with His decree. Observing this naturally challenges the human ego, which often resists limitation and struggles with acceptance. When a person sees how Allah sustains even the most fragile forms of life, the heart begins to soften and release the illusion of self-sufficiency. The Quran repeatedly emphasizes that humans were not created to dominate creation with pride, but to act as caretakers with responsibility and humility. Small creatures remind us of this role without words. They show that survival itself is not a guarantee earned through status, but a mercy granted by Allah. This realization reframes success and failure in a healthier way. A believer learns that their value is not diminished by hardship nor elevated by comfort, but defined by sincerity and submission to Allah's guidance. Awareness grows alongside humility. When a person slows down enough to notice what is usually ignored, they become more present in their own life. This presence reduces heedlessness, which the Quran warns against not as a moral failure alone, but as a spiritual blindness. Heedlessness distances the heart from Allah, while awareness brings it closer. Small creatures act as quiet anchors, pulling the heart back into the moment and away from constant mental noise. This awareness is not meant to overwhelm, but to ground the believer in gratitude and balance. Humility also protects the heart from comparison. Much anxiety and dissatisfaction come from measuring oneself against others. Observing small creatures teaches that every creation has a unique role that cannot be replaced or compared. An ant does not envy a bird, nor does a bird wish to be something else. Each fulfills its purpose within its limits. This lesson, when internalized, helps believers accept their own path without resentment. It encourages contentment without complacency, effort without arrogance, and ambition without forgetting reliance on Allah. Islam does not ask believers to diminish themselves, but to understand themselves accurately. Small creatures reflect this balance. They strive within their capacity, move with persistence, and respond to their environment without despair. From this, the believer learns that humility does not mean passivity. It means knowing when to act and when to surrender outcomes to Allah. This balance strengthens tawakkul and reduces unnecessary emotional burden. Another aspect of humility taught through creation is restraint. Many creatures take only what they need, leaving balance intact. This quietly contrasts with human excess, whether in consumption, speech, or desire. Reflection here encourages ethical living rooted in moderation, a core Islamic value. It reminds the heart that barakah is not found in accumulation, but in balance and gratitude. Ultimately, humility born from observing small creatures reconnects the believer to their dependence on Allah without shame. Dependence is not weakness in Islam, but truth. The heart that accepts this truth becomes calmer, more sincere, and more receptive to guidance. Awareness grows not through dramatic signs, but through quiet reminders placed intentionally in everyday life. When the believer learns to see value in what is small, ordinary, and often ignored, they begin to see themselves more clearly, their purpose more honestly, and their relationship with Allah with greater depth and peace. Gratitude in Islam is not limited to verbal expressions or moments of ease. It is a state of awareness that reshapes how the heart understands daily life. When a believer begins to observe the balance and harmony present in creation, especially among ordinary creatures that quietly fulfill their roles, gratitude develops naturally rather than being forced. The Quran often directs attention to how provision is distributed across creation, reminding humans that sustenance is not random but carefully measured. When the heart reflects on this balance, it becomes more aware of blessings that were previously overlooked, and this awareness transforms dissatisfaction into thankfulness. Every creature around us lives within a system of mercy and order. They are provided for in ways that align with their needs, neither overwhelmed with excess nor abandoned in neglect. This balance becomes a silent lesson for the human heart, which often struggles between fear of scarcity and desire for more. Observing how creation functions without hoarding or panic helps recalibrate expectations. The believer begins to understand that provision does not require constant anxiety to arrive. Instead, it flows according to Allah's wisdom, and recognizing this reduces emotional strain while strengthening trust. Gratitude also deepens when a person recognizes that their own life exists within the same divine system. The air we breathe, the shelter we rely on, the food that sustains us, and the safety that surrounds us are part of a larger mercy that extends to all living beings. Small creatures remind us that Allah's care is not selective or occasional. It is continuous and all-encompassing. This realization shifts the heart from focusing on what is missing to appreciating what is already present, which is a key foundation of emotional stability in Islam. Islam connects gratitude directly to Barakah. Barakah is not about quantity alone, but about sufficiency, peace, and benefit. When a believer observes creation fulfilling its purpose without excess, it reinforces the idea that blessings grow when they are acknowledged, not when they are chased. Gratitude aligns the heart with contentment, making space for barakah to settle. This does not mean abandoning effort, but it reframes effort as an act of trust rather than desperation. Balance is another essential lesson drawn from observing creation. Many emotional struggles stem from imbalance, either through overattachment to worldly outcomes or neglect of spiritual nourishment. Creation models balance effortlessly. Creatures engage with the world as needed while remaining within their limits. This balance teaches the believer that dunya and akhirah are not enemies. One can work, strive, and plan while remaining grounded in remembrance and gratitude. When gratitude guides action, priorities become clearer and stress loses its intensity. Gratitude also softens the heart toward others. When a person recognizes how much they receive without earning it, judgment decreases and compassion increases. The believer becomes more patient, less reactive, and more understanding. This emotional maturity is rooted in recognizing that everyone is sustained by the same mercy, regardless of status or circumstance. Small creatures reflect this equality in dependence, reinforcing humility and empathy. The Quran associates gratitude with awareness, not perfection. It acknowledges that humans will struggle, forget, and feel overwhelmed. Yet gratitude is presented as a way back to balance, not as a burden. When a believer looks at creation and sees how everything functions under Allah's care, the heart is reminded that its own struggles are not signs of abandonment. This awareness provides reassurance, reducing anxiety and restoring hope. Gratitude cultivated through reflection on creation does not ignore hardship. Instead, it places hardship within a broader perspective. The believer learns that difficulty does not cancel blessings, and blessings do not eliminate tests. Both coexist within Allah's wisdom. Observing how creation continues despite challenges reinforces resilience and patience. This resilience is not hardened endurance, but calm acceptance paired with continued effort. Over time, gratitude becomes a lens through which life is viewed. Complaints give way to reflection, and fear gives way to trust. The heart becomes less reactive and more grounded. Creation, in its quiet consistency, continues to teach this lesson without words. When the believer allows these lessons to enter the heart, gratitude transforms from a concept into a lived experience, shaping emotions, decisions, and the overall relationship with Allah in a way that brings peace and clarity. When we look at the spider, it appears insignificant, easily brushed aside, often unnoticed unless it disrupts our space. Yet Allah chose this small creature to carry one of the most profound spiritual metaphors in the Quran. where he explains that the weakest of homes is the home of the spider, not because the silk lacks tensile strength, but because the structure offers no real protection, no warmth, no lasting safety. And this lesson is directed straight at the human heart, because many people build their emotional, financial, and spiritual security the same way, weaving delicate networks of reliance on status, wealth, relationships, plans, and control, assuming these webs will hold them when life shakes. Yet the moment loss arrives, health declines, people leave, or plans collapse, everything tears apart at once, exposing how fragile that sense of security always was. And the Quran does not mock this reality, but gently unveils it so the believer can reflect and realign. Because the spider does not know its home is weak. It builds according to its instinct. Just as humans often chase worldly stability without realizing they are placing their trust in something that was never meant to carry the weight of their fears, hopes, and future. And this is where the spiritual lesson deepens. Because Islam does not condemn effort, planning, or structure, but it constantly redirects the heart away from attachment, reminding us that means are tools, not foundations, and that the heart was created to rest on Allah alone. When a person relies on wealth, they feel powerful while it grows, and helpless when it fades. When they rely on people, they feel secure while loyalty remains, and shattered when it changes. When they rely on their own strength, intelligence, or discipline, they feel in control until exhaustion, failure, or time humbles them. And this cycle produces anxiety, overthinking, and fear of loss, because deep down the soul senses the weakness of what it is leaning on. And this is why Tawakkul is not passive hope, but active alignment, doing what is halal and possible, while emotionally surrendering outcomes to Allah. Understanding that no web we spin can protect us from what He decrees, and no loss can harm us beyond what He allows. And when this understanding settles in the heart, the believer begins to build differently, still working, still striving, but no longer expecting creation to behave like the Creator, no longer demanding permanence from what was designed to change. And the spider's home also teaches us about illusion, because from a distance a web looks intricate, impressive, even beautiful in the light, yet one touch reveals how empty it truly is. And many worldly achievements appear the same, admired by others, envied even, but internally hollow if Allah is not at the center. Because Barakah does not come from complexity or expansion, but from alignment, sincerity, and obedience. A small income with Allah can feel spacious, while a large one without Him can feel suffocating. A simple life with remembrance can feel rich, while a decorated one without meaning can feel fragile. And this is why the Qur'anic metaphor is timeless, because every generation repeats the same mistake with different materials. Today the webs are careers, platforms, savings, productivity, influence, and control. And while none of these are haram in themselves, they become spiritually dangerous when they replace reliance. When the heart says, if this remains, I will be okay. And if this leaves, I am finished. Because that belief transfers power away from Allah, even if unintentionally. And Allah gently calls the believer back by exposing the weakness of the web, not to humiliate, but to free the heart from false burdens. Because trusting weak structures exhausts the soul, while trusting Allah strengthens it, even in difficulty. And this is why repentance is often tied to hardship, not as punishment, but as mercy. Because when the web collapses, the believer finally looks upward, realizing that the only true shelter was always above. And the most beautiful transformation happens when a person stops asking creation to give what only Allah can give: peace, stability, worth, and safety. And instead uses creation as a means, while anchoring the heart in remembrance, gratitude, and surrender. And at that point, even uncertainty becomes lighter, because the believer no longer feels the need to control everything to feel safe. They understand that safety was never in the web to begin with. It was always in the one who sees the spider and the sky, who provides for what crawls and what flies, who allows webs to form and collapse according to wisdom, and who invites the human heart to step out of fragile illusions and into a reliance that does not tear when life applies pressure. When we observe birds in the early hours of the morning, there is a quiet lesson unfolding that most hearts overlook, because they leave their nests empty, exposed, and uncertain of what the day will bring. Yet they move with calm purpose, not panic, not paralysis. And this scene reflects a profound Islamic principle about tawakkul that is often misunderstood, because trusting Allah does not mean waiting without effort. And striving does not mean carrying the weight of outcomes on the heart. And the bird embodies this balance without words, because it does not sit in the nest demanding provision to arrive, nor does it anxiously hoard more than it needs. It simply goes out, searching within the limits Allah has set, using what Allah has given. And then it returns satisfied with what was decreed. And this is why the Prophet described how birds are provided for, not to romanticize nature, but to correct the human mindset that confuses control with security. Because many people exhaust themselves not through effort, but through emotional attachment to results, constantly worrying about what will happen if income drops, plans fail, opportunities close, or the future shifts, and this internal pressure slowly drains peace, even when outward life appears stable. While the bird teaches us that provision is written, but effort is required, and peace comes from trusting the one who wrote it, not from obsessing over how it will arrive. And this is where Barakah enters the conversation, because Barakah is not an increase in quantity alone, but an expansion of benefit, sufficiency, and calm within what is given. And a person can earn little yet feel supported, while another earns much and feels constantly threatened, because Barakah responds to reliance, sincerity, and halal effort, not to anxiety-driven pursuit. And the bird does not know tomorrow's weather, predators, or obstacles, yet it does not allow uncertainty to immobilize it. Because uncertainty was never meant to be eliminated. It was meant to redirect the heart toward Allah. And this is why excessive overthinking about risk often signals a spiritual imbalance, not a financial one. Because the heart is seeking reassurance from calculations rather than remembrance, from predictions rather than trust. And Islam gently corrects this by reminding the believer that Allah is Al-Razak, the one who provides consistently, not randomly, not forgetfully, and not unjustly. And when a person internalizes this, their relationship with work changes. They still plan, they still strive, but they no longer equate their worth with their earnings, nor their safety with their savings, because they understand that provision includes peace, health, relationships, guidance, and protection, not just money. And the bird also teaches contentment, because it does not return to the nest comparing itself to another bird's portion. It does not delay gratitude until it receives more. It accepts what sustains it for the day. And this directly confronts the modern habit of constant comparison, where people measure their lives against others and feel deprived even while being provided for, which erodes gratitude and blinds the heart to existing blessings. And gratitude in Islam is not passive appreciation. It is an active state that attracts increase by acknowledging the source, using the blessing correctly, and remaining humble. And when gratitude disappears, even abundance becomes heavy. And when gratitude is present, even simplicity feels rich. And this is why the Quran consistently connects provision with thankfulness. Not because Allah needs praise, but because the human heart needs grounding. And the bird's simplicity also reminds us that halal effort matters more than aggressive pursuit. Because chasing provision through stress shortcuts or moral compromise may increase numbers but strips barakah, leaving the soul restless. While a calmer path aligned with conscience may appear slower, but nourishes both dunya and akhirah. And the believer who learns from the bird begins to ask different questions. Not how can I control every outcome, but how can I align my effort with what pleases Allah? Not how can I guarantee security, but how can I strengthen my reliance? Because true security was never promised in the world, only sufficiency for those who trust. And this shift does not remove challenges, but it changes how the heart carries them. Because when difficulty comes, the believer does not interpret it as abandonment, but as part of a larger provision that includes growth, purification, and redirection. And in this way, the bird becomes a quiet teacher of balance, reminding the human heart that rizq is not hunted with fear, but sought with effort and received with trust. And that peace does not come from knowing the future, but from knowing the one who holds it. When a person encounters small, ordinary creatures repeatedly in their daily environment, Islam encourages the heart not towards superstition, but toward muhasabah, an honest internal audit of one's state with Allah. Because reminders in Islam are not always dramatic or overwhelming. Sometimes they are subtle, recurring, and quiet, meant to slow the heart down and redirect attention inward. And this is where repentance becomes a living process rather than a one-time emotional reaction. Because Tawbah in Islam is not reserved only for major sins, but is a continuous return of the heart whenever it drifts into heedlessness, arrogance, ingratitude, or excessive attachment to the dunya. And the Quran repeatedly calls believers to reflect, not because Allah needs awareness, But because the human heart forgets easily, and forgetfulness is one of the most dangerous spiritual conditions, as it allows sins to normalize, blessings to feel deserved, and guidance to feel distant. And when something small interrupts routine, whether it is an insect, an animal, or a moment that breaks the rhythm of daily life, it can serve as a pause that invites self-questioning, not in a fearful or accusatory way, but in a gentle and honest one, asking where the heart has been directing its trust, what intentions have been shaping actions, and whether reliance has slowly shifted from Allah to means, status, or self. And this form of reflection aligns with the prophetic encouragement to renew repentance regularly, because even the most righteous hearts require cleansing, not always from outward sin, but from inner rust such as pride, impatience, resentment, or neglect of remembrance. And repentance in Islam is deeply tied to hope, not despair, because Allah describes himself as the one who loves those who return to him, not those who never falter. And this corrects a widespread misconception that the repentance is only for people who have fallen far, when in reality it is a sign of spiritual awareness and humility. And when a believer responds to small reminders with self-correction rather than panic or blame, the heart becomes softer and more receptive to guidance. Because repentance opens channels of barakah that are blocked by stubbornness and denial. And this is why many people feel stuck despite effort, because outward action without inward correction leads to exhaustion without elevation, while even small inner shifts accompanied by sincere repentance can unlock ease that calculations cannot produce. And repentance also restores balance between dunya and akhirah, because it reorders priorities gently, reminding the believer that success is not measured only by accumulation, but by alignment, not by how much is gained, but by how clean the heart remains while gaining it. And this awareness protects a person from becoming spiritually numb while being materially active, because Islam never condemns work, ambition, or growth, but it warns against hearts that run without checking direction. And when repentance becomes habitual, the believer stops viewing reminders as threats and starts viewing them as mercy, because Allah does not expose the heart to reminders unless he intends good, guidance, or protection. And this perspective removes fear-based interpretations and replaces them with gratitude, because being reminded means being cared for, and being called back means the door is still open. And repentance also heals anxiety, because much inner restlessness comes not from circumstances, but from unresolved guilt, suppressed accountability, and misaligned intentions. And when a person regularly turns back to Allah, acknowledging weakness without self-hatred, the heart feels lighter, because it is no longer carrying the burden of perfection or control. And this humility strengthens tawakkul, as the believer recognizes that guidance, provision, and stability are not earned solely through effort, but are granted through mercy. And this understanding deepens sincerity, because actions are no longer performed to prove worth, but to seek closeness. And closeness to Allah reshapes how the world is experienced, making trials feel purposeful and blessings feel safer. And this is why repentance is described as a return, not a retreat, because it moves the believer forward spiritually, even if it feels like stepping back emotionally. And over time, a heart that responds to subtle reminders with repentance becomes more conscious, more grateful, and more balanced, not because life becomes easier, but because the heart becomes clearer. And clarity is one of the greatest forms of provision, allowing a person to navigate uncertainty without losing trust, effort without losing sincerity, and worldly responsibilities without losing the akhirah. Because true repentance does not isolate a believer from life, it anchors them within it with awareness, humility, and quiet strength. When we consider the ordinary creatures around us, the birds, insects, and small animals that quietly inhabit our homes, gardens, and surroundings, Islam invites us to reflect on the deeper lessons these beings convey, not through superstition or fanciful imagination, but through observation and heartful contemplation. Because each creature, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, operates under a system of divine order, fulfilling its role in a way that sustains the balance of life. And this order is a clear sign of Allah's wisdom, mercy, and precision, reminding the believer that every aspect of creation, even the tiniest movement, is meaningful and purposeful. And when humans ignore these signs, they risk living in distraction, unaware of the spiritual lessons continuously available to them. And this is why the Qur'an repeatedly calls attention to creatures as symbols of guidance, instructing believers to consider the birds of flight, the bee's labor, and the spider's web, each a mirror to the principles of reliance, diligence, balance, and trust. Because while humans often measure success in accumulation, status, or material gain, these creatures operate with what Allah has decreed, using only what is sufficient and leaving the outcomes to Him. And this teaches the heart humility, contentment, and patience, qualities essential to both worldly and spiritual well-being. And when a person pauses to observe these small signs, the heart is reminded of tawakkul, which is not passive submission, but an active alignment of effort with trust, a balance that removes anxiety while encouraging responsibility because the bird does not fret over provision, yet it still rises each morning to seek it, and the ant does not question the size of its colony, but works diligently to prepare for days ahead, demonstrating that reliance on Allah does not excuse negligence, and that effort without attachment is the foundation of true barakah. And this reflection extends to the believer's relationship with Allah. Because just as these creatures do not attempt to control the outcomes beyond their effort, humans are called to surrender what is beyond their hands, acknowledging that knowledge, timing, and results belong ultimately to Allah. And this fosters gratitude, sincerity, and emotional resilience, because a heart anchored in this understanding does not collapse under minor setbacks or delayed responses to prayers. Rather, it views these moments as part of divine orchestration, teaching patience, self-discipline, and inner peace. And the Quran repeatedly emphasizes that everything in the heavens and earth glorifies Allah, including creatures that humans often overlook. And by contemplating this, the believer is invited to participate in this spiritual awareness, to see the world as a series of interconnected signs, each carrying a lesson, each nudging the heart toward reflection, humility, and obedience. And when this consciousness develops, even everyday encounters with animals, insects, or birds transform into reminders of mercy, provision, and divine wisdom, because the natural order becomes a living classroom, constantly offering scenarios to practice gratitude, patience, and reliance. And the believer begins to recognize that while humans may feel powerful through wealth, control, or knowledge, true mastery lies in understanding one's place within the system Allah has created as a caretaker, observer, and learner. And this understanding prevents arrogance, reduces envy, and cultivates contentment, because it aligns perception with reality, reinforcing the principle that every creature, however small, operates in harmony with the Creator's will, and that human beings endowed with intellect and responsibility are expected to learn, reflect, and act accordingly. And this reflection also nurtures emotional intelligence, because noticing the simplicity and trust in these creatures teaches the believer how to navigate uncertainty without fear, how to maintain calm under stress, and how to approach life's challenges with reliance on Allah rather than panic. And when these lessons are internalized, even the mundane becomes spiritually rich, each moment an opportunity to practice mindfulness, appreciation, and devotion, so that the believer's heart grows sensitive to both the visible and invisible lessons of creation, understanding that what may seem trivial, an ant carrying food, a bird building a nest, a spider spinning its web, is in reality a sign pointing toward greater truths, that effort and reliance, balance and patience, gratitude and contentment all converge under Allah's wisdom, shaping a heart that is resilient, aware, and spiritually attuned, capable of finding peace and purpose in every interaction with the world, seeing that nothing is wasted, nothing random, and nothing outside Allah's encompassing knowledge and mercy.